Yeah, thank you all for joining. Had to scramble. My first IT hookup wasn't working, so back at my desk now. But thank you all for joining us again for one of our working group sessions. Today's working group session is actually more of a hands-on workshop, but just for those who may not be aware, we have been doing these sessions primarily virtually since April of 2020. We started back in December of 19, getting together as a local group. And over the last few years, I think this has become a good outlet for many of us and a great educational opportunity for those of us who have been looking to get more involved in the and make progress towards the AIA 2030 commitment. And we've run through, as you can see on these posters, a number of topics over the last few years. And what we wanted to do this year was kind of bring some of these come back to the beginning, if you will, and do some initial presentations, kind of focus on three areas though: goal setting, embodied carbon, and our next set of sessions will be on energy modeling. But to come back to some of the topics that I think we got the impression had the greatest interest and understand where we're all working on and focusing on ourselves, and have an initial presentation on each of these, and then move on to a hands-on exercise towards implementing these aspects of our work, setting sustainability goals, implementing embodied carbon analysis into our projects, and also energy modeling, which has been a long-standing important piece of getting towards the 2030 commitment. And so today's session, it was listed as embodied carbon on the previous slide, but to kind of refine that a little bit, we are focusing on carbon accounting, and in particular for the purposes of this exercise, and following on the great presentation that Ifri, Alex, and Vikram, I think it was, gave in June. Trying to look at the calendar here, really kind of set the stage for this session, going through the embodied carbon process and design, and what to try to implement where. So today's effort will be focused on on an exercise that tries to implement some of what we learned about in our June session. And just to list the learning objectives, an important part of our AIA credits. And by the way, please do enter your AIA numbers into the chat. I think I saw somebody had posted that request to get credits. There are CEUs available today. So learning objectives today, we are going to be looking at EPDs in part through the EC3 software. Evaluate embodied carbon criteria in different projects and products, and help make informed selections towards that end. And also discuss, particularly in our breakout session, how to apply strategies for reducing embodied carbon into a sample facade that we'll go through the specifics of. And also we've decided to center this exercise around the use of EC3, which is a pretty accessible, free embodied carbon tracking tool, analysis tool. And we've set up an exercise to use that tool to help us evaluate embodied carbon in three sample facade scenarios. So as mentioned, we are going to break into this exercise in a few minutes, but before we do that, I did want to turn it over to Ifri to kind of reprise and introduce the exercise that we're going to be doing, and add anything that you see fit, Ifri. And if you want to take over sharing, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I absolutely will. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you have a great lunch that you have alongside you right now. For everyone who was with us last time, which hopefully was almost everyone, what we're going to be doing today is looking at the upfront carbon, specifically modules A1 through A3, or the carbon associated with the manufacturing phases and the extraction phases of different materials that go into different facade systems. And we're going to be looking at how we can calculate the typical embodied carbon of those systems, and then also how we can try and optimize the embodied carbon of those systems when we're looking at procurement. And the way that we're going to be doing that is predominantly through some data that we've already put into the spreadsheet for the materials that don't have EPDs and EC3. And then we'll be using EC3 as a part of the exercise. Part of the reason for that is because EPDs are super complicated, and we're going to look at one to talk about some of what EC3 does for you. EC3 is a free online tool. The link is in the chat. If you haven't yet signed up for it, please feel free to do so while I give this intro. So when you sign in, you'll see something that looks kind of like this. And you'll see this menu on the side. They do have a thing that walks you through how to use it. You can get a much more in-depth tutorial that way. What we're going to need to do for today is to use this find and compare materials button. And you can either then work through this interface or through the side menu over here. And essentially what we're doing is we're working through by CSI division. So if, for example, I want to look at my insulation products, I go into thermal and moisture protection, I can expand that out, and I pick insulation. Now I can expand that out further to be a little bit pickier about what kind of insulation I'm looking for. If, for example, I only want blanket insulations, I can start there, or I can go back to sort of the mother of that tree and go with insulations as a whole. When I'm ready, I click next. And this is essentially just starting to limit the scope of your search a little bit further. Similar to Google, you will find this tool more useful if you use slightly more advanced or more specific search terms. So for example, if you go to Google and you say, what's the best concrete? You're really not going to get a whole lot of help from the broader internet. But if you say, I'm looking for a 3 KSI concrete, what are the SCMs I can use? You'll probably get something that pops up within the first couple of hits on Google. So similarly with EC3, for each of their product categories, they have some different product category specific limiting terms that come up here under performance specifications. Things like what kind of material is your material you're using, your primary material. For insulation specifically, they have in EPDs different requirements for how those EPDs are made based off of where those things get applied. You may or may not want to use that. If you keep it broader, you can also do geography searches. If you keep it broader, you can just click search and you'll get a large number. They'll even warn you that it's going to be a larger number because I haven't narrowed it down at all. It takes a little bit longer to do it when you're doing a broader term. And you'll see I have 721 product specific EPDs in this category. And then I also have some industry EPDs. So for people who aren't familiar with EPDs, what that means is we have some generic ones that are made by people like the Spray Polyurethane Foam Alliance. These are typically sort of the manufacturer associations that make their industry-wide EPDs. These are averages based off of input data from the different companies that participate in them. So it's not necessarily representing the average of the entire industry as a whole. It's representing the average of the participating manufacturers. Which can be a little bit different. And it means the numbers are actually probably a little bit better than what a generic random industry-wide average would be, because the manufacturers who participate in things like an industry-wide EPD are typically those that care a little bit more about their environmental performance than the ones who do not. So as you can see, this is way more than is super useful, but also I probably don't need things being made in loose fill cellulose for this exercise. So I might go back up and then start limiting things. The other thing you can do is using this more category. You can search by standards in the industry, things like ASTM standards. And more importantly, you can also limit by PCR. PCR stands for product category rule, and these are the rules that are set up for the people making the EPDs. This is part of why when we're doing EPD comparisons, we want to be doing it within a product category or within, like a CSI division. And that's because there are different rules for different groups, and therefore different ways that things get calculated, different things get included or excluded. So it's useful if you can limit your PCR to being ones that are all comparable. What you'll find as you go through this is PCRs do have dates that they're considered valid, much like EPDs do. They have expiration dates. And so, for example, if you're looking at the UL specifications for a PCR for insulation, you'll see that there are a handful in here. And picking the right one is sometimes a little bit hit or miss in terms of which one is going to have more results in it that are useful to you, but it does mean that you're always comparing as much as possible apples to apples. So that can be something that's super useful. So for this one, I'm just going to pick the one for building insulation, and you'll see my search has been cleared out. And now I can click search, and you'll see that I'll have quite a bit fewer EPDs that'll pop up for this. What we get over in the box plot is just a representation across the entirety of my search. So this essentially shows me the range of everything. Stuff inside of the green could be considered, kind of average-ish. It's kind of the middle 50% of EPDs. Stuff up above the max is stuff that you probably don't want to use, and stuff that's down at the minimum is usually super high performing in terms of the carbon. That doesn't mean that necessarily they perform exactly the same in terms of durability or some of the other architectural factors you might want to consider. The other thing that's nice about using EC3 as opposed to trying to just get EPDs from manufacturers is that they've got this converted per unit thing for their searches. And what that means is I don't have to worry that my carbon is going to change with my R value, because what they've done is they've converted the amount of carbon that they're reporting over here in this carbon column to being per square foot achieving 1 RSI. That's what's known as the functional unit. And essentially it says per square foot of insulation with 1 RSI value, you have this much carbon. So if you are using mineral wool and you need 5 inches of mineral wool and you're comparing it to EPS and you only need 3 inches of EPS to achieve the same R value, then this is doing that conversion for you, and you don't have to worry about updating the thickness of your insulation and doing any kind of multiplication when you're doing these quick comparisons. So that's the other benefit of using a tool like EC3, is it's doing some of that for you. And then you can start to sort things and search things, and you can get super into the weeds on this one. We're just covering the basics so that you can do today's exercise. But you can see that if I click on the word details, it's going to show me a little bit more about what the product is. This 80% confidence has to do with some statistics that they run. But really what you're going to be using is the GWP reported in the EPD. And then that tells you that it's this much carbon, right? CO2e, meaning carbon emissions equivalent, per square foot RSI. And then if you want to, you can click on the download EPD button and it'll download the original EPD for you. You can also click the open button in order to get what's known as the digitized EPD, which focuses on just the carbon typically. There are a few of them that they've input the other impact categories for, but for the most part, it's just showing you a little bit more detail around that particular EPD. And it shows you where that EPD falls against the rest of that product category. So you can see, for example, since I sorted the column by who had the lowest carbon, it's not a huge surprise to see that this one that was at the very top is the lowest carbon. It's performing significantly better than everyone else. So that is the general intro to EC3. And I've been noting there are a whole lot of things coming up in the chat. So let me just make sure. Unfortunately, no, I can't zoom in my screen any further, but hopefully
they're mostly just
do it.
registrations. There's no questions.
Okay, great.
In the chat.
So that is essentially EC3. And what we're going to be doing today is asking you to use EC3 to find some embodied carbon values, to calculate embodied carbon of some facade assemblies, and then also to do a little bit of optimization and look at what products might be viable to switch in and out, or what assemblies might be viable to switch in and out. A word of caution to everyone is that using EC3 can get you swapping things that aren't actually architecturally equivalent. So for example, in Division 7, if I'm just looking at insulation, I can do that search and I may end up with things that come in that are actually from the membrane roofing category, or are actually insulated metal panel, because those are also considered Division 7. So just sorting and picking the thing that comes up as the lowest carbon is not necessarily like an architecturally valid decision. So it's something that you want to look at just to make sure. Similarly, in the gypsum category, they don't sort the products by thickness unless you ask them to. So you might not necessarily want to be swapping out type X 7/8 gypsum with a 1/2 inch tile backer board. But those are all in the same product category, following the same product category rule, and therefore are listed as being comparable with an EC3. So again, you'll want to actually look at the product before you assume that you can swap them out. Any questions or concerns? Anyone having problems logging in or anything else before we get started?
Julie, you can unmute and ask your question if you want.
Thanks. Thank you for the intro. So quick question, as part of this exercise that we're doing, and I know, and I haven't done a deep dive in EC3 yet on how to use the tool yet, but so for this exercise, will we be comparing maybe like very product specific, the difference between the generic outputs for carbon versus an EPD product specific? Is that part of this exercise as well, is to be able to see where they're really varying, to be able to make a decision?
Yeah, so someone else is going to be introducing the exercise a little bit more specifically, but having worked on the group crafting it, yes, we're going to be starting with mostly kind of the industry-wide EPD numbers, and then asking you to fill some of those in, and then comparing products against each other, and saying, how do we optimize this assembly? Are there things that we would swap out either as individual products, of like there's a product that's amazing in this category that we should be using, or are there assemblies that actually we look at and go like, well, instead of doing that array of 5 different products, instead we could swap it out for these 2 products that will have a lower combined carbon. And we'll be doing that in groups, so don't worry, you're not going to be put totally isolated trying to figure all this stuff out.
So one other question then, in EC3, are you giving direction and clarity on the relevance of those decisions to rating programs specifically, like Living Building Challenge, if you're trying to meet LEED Platinum?
Today?
No. Well, overall, does EC3 do that?
EC3 is not going to track any specific rating systems for you, in part because it would lead, for example, you can do, there are 2 different pilot credits that are associated with the use of EC3. There's just the collection of EPDs that's associated with points. You can use it as an input to your whole building LCA carbon reduction. You can, there are a lot of different ways that it could go in here. You can't use EC3 as your only tool to achieve the whole building LCA credits in LEED.
That's what I needed to know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you want to do that, there are lots of other tools. We talked about them last time. EC3 does not qualify for those. Okay,
thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue though, that question and that discussion, and I'm gonna share again, and that will transition over to the exercise. So as Ifri started to do in the demo, she kind of walked through the steps of how you would search for products, make selections, and to your question, Julie, we will be kind of getting into things kind of in progressive levels of detail. We'll start with the industry wide EPD and then kind of look at refining into product specific. So with that, I do want to introduce and also thank our facilitators who will be helping lead these sessions. Ifri, you've just met. I probably should have put the slide before the agenda, but it gave us the great quick run through of EC3, and Shabe, Surya, and Aishu, who helped develop this. The spreadsheet that we're gonna be looking at. I'll give you a quick sneak peek, but
Josh, that's the wrong one.
oh, that's the wrong one.
Yep.
Okay, then I won't do that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna go back to. Sorry about that. Okay, so I will not do that then. But what we'll be doing, let's see, is in our exercise, we are going to look at three different wall systems, and John Key is going to sort us all into different groups so that we are kind of evenly
Ready
distributed.
to go.
All right, but we're going to run through three kind of typical wall assemblies and go through the process of searching industry EPDs, product specific, and then kind of a little more free form exercise of changing more variables out. But the first two steps really oriented around getting our sea legs with the EC3 program. So with that, I think we want to go ahead and get into the exercise, and we will see you guys on the backside to kind of hear about some lessons learned.
All right, so I just launched it. There should be a pop-up that showed up on your screen. You have, oh, and it says it's going to close in 30 minutes, but well, we'll see. All right.
How many groups did we end up with, Junkie?
So there's 3 groups and there's 10 people in each.
Awesome.
And you're
Does that
with
mean we have
Aishu.
Does that mean we have 2 moderators for each?
Yes, so it's going to be
Cool.
you and Aishu. And I am going into the middle group now.
Sounds good.
All right. And Jen, hi. Should I just move her over? Move to.
Hey, Jackie.
Hey, how are you, Jen? Oh, there should be a pop-up on your screen to join the wood group with Ifri. There you go. Hey, Roshni, do you have a
Hey,
preference for what room you
Janki.
want to go to?
Can I go into wood?
Yeah. All right. All right, welcome back, guys. I will give the rest of the group a couple of minutes to come back and finish whatever conversations they were in the middle of, so we can talk about this further. I guess while we're waiting, what did people find the most useful so far? Or what could we do? Any feedback on our next workshop that we're planning in August?
I mean, I will say, like, having the instructions a little bit ahead of time to review
Yeah.
and test out just the orientating through the things. I mean, I've been in EC3 occasionally, but it's been more than a few days since I've been in there. So just getting the heads up to jump in and refresh on how to orient.
Yeah, we unfortunately this is like the height of vacation season.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
we're in true not procrastination, but like true like architectural fashion. We're working on this like right up until the workshop, and there comes everyone else. Hi all. I think we've got everyone out of the breakout rooms.
Did anyone finish?
right.
Woo!
No.
I don't know. Shoot, did we get the last data in there?
I put in the last number, so I think that we got it.
We got it.
All right.
Okay.
So we're starting with wood. So we thought we would just use this time to kind of debrief and see what other groups worked on and kind of report out a summary if we were able to. I'll say our group didn't really get to there, but we did focus on navigating EC3 and what do you do when EC3 doesn't have an EPD that you're looking for. So that was the metal group. Aisha, do you want to give us a debrief on wood? You can share your screen. Or, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think we had a good conversation about wood. I think we also spent some time just looking at EC3, what were the industry averages versus what was product specific. We did spend some time trying to understand what were the industry averages. We couldn't find an industry average like EPD for exterior gypsum sheeting. So we ended up taking that average value that you get overall from EC3, and the same thing for fiberglass. We didn't get an industry-wide EPD, so we just took the average value from that. There were also some conversions we did in the beginning, trying to convert from meters square to square feet. So that was a good conversation we had. We did in the end, like in the last 60 seconds, I think we quickly shuffled and tried to find some specific product, specific EPDs, and we filled in that info. So I think overall we were able to do like a 15% savings in general. So yeah, it was not bad for a first run.
That's awesome. So we ran into the same issue in our group where we couldn't find the EPD for exterior sheathing, and we took a slightly different approach where we Googled it and found something from US Gypsum. And again, had to do the same kind of conversions and make sure that we were using the correct cradle to gate scope. Wow, all right, it's lunchtime. Any thoughts on that? Like, that seems to be a good alternative, or are there other alternatives that could be considered in instances where you can't find an EPD in EC3, or other tools that you can reference in that case? Or no?
This reminds me, this would be a great thing to do, someone to make a workflow. You know, it's like, okay, this is because there's so many steps, and I don't do this. In fact, I've never done this sort of comparison, although I have a project where I need to compare an ICF to a wood framed wall because I want to talk a client out of the ICF. But the work, you know, this is complicated stuff if you don't do it every day.
We have similar question in the brick wall because we have a CMU wall that doesn't have a industry-wide EPD, but we tackled that question by filtering normal weight CMU and took the average of the 16 product EPD that we can find. So in the brick, we went through the industry-wide together, and we have a little shorter time for product, but we went through the category that do have product specific, and I copied it from a previously answered sheet to find a reductions in the percentage where we can do. And we went through how to convert the unit in a insulation for mineral wall, for example, and went through how this formula was made and tried to help people bridge between R value and RSI, and also identifying 4 category in the brick wall, which has a higher embodied carbon, brick veneer, mortar, CMU, and spray foam insulation. And the overall is 8,300 for this piece of wall.
Yeah, and I think Shabay, just to emphasize, I think we did, like you said, we spent a lot of time talking about the conversion. And I think in particular, the insulation products were among the more complicated because of that extra conversion to the RSI, the standard unit.
Yes.
And we also had a Canadian member in our group too, so it was more used to using meters. We actually we had a very dispersed group. Some members from Portland and Ohio and Canada. So, but
Cool. I
yeah.
wonder if Zoom knew that or something. There was a way to,
Yeah.
like when it does its automatic sort, like put all the out-of-staters and out of country in one room.
But
No flags.
I was curious if anybody had any tips. I mean, I started to understand that like how we Shabay kind of walked us all through the calculation of the R value per inch converting to the standard unit, and then the EPD may have been in square meters, may have been in square feet. So if that was the case, we had to do that conversion also. So we were just kind of really focused on those steps, and like I think maybe some of you experienced, we didn't get all the way through the exercise, but I think it was instructive nonetheless. I'm just curious if what other groups came across there.
So can I ask a general question? So we have a number 8,000 equivalents, CO2 equivalents, kilograms per what was it, 576 square feet. How do we know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent? Is it only comparing a lower number to, that we're calculating to an industry average number? Like 8,000 kilograms of CO2 doesn't mean anything to me. So how do I make that relevant to my daily life, I guess is the question.
Aoife, you want to kind of take that? I don't know.
Sure.
There's not really good benchmarks
So-
out there. But yeah.
Well, they're developing them. There are some benchmark numbers for specific materials that have been published by the Carbon Leadership Forum. If you don't already know them, you should. They are a great resource on this topic area. They also have some whole building life cycle assessment benchmarking. They've got an old one from 2017 that they're updating actually this year. They're running a pilot collecting data right now to make sure that people can submit it and have it be comparable. So the numbers at kind of the whole building scale, actually we're starting to be able to develop some benchmarks for that, where kind of 500 would be considered sort of average, relatively easily achieved by any structural type. And then 350 would be like good, really good, hard to achieve with anything that isn't wood. And then obviously the goal is eventually we'll all get to 0. But that's really, really hard from an embodied perspective right now. Because obviously there are emissions in making materials almost always. So those are some rough numbers at the whole building scale. And then the material benchmark scale, the CLF just finished publishing updates their numbers over the summer. This summer, I think it was this summer, it might have been earlier this spring. It was hot out, so my brain automatically converts that to being summer, which in Philadelphia and with global warming is probably a terrible thing. So I'll start referring to March as summer. But yeah, so that's a place where you can start to look at their numbers and start to get a feeling of sort of what is expected as being reasonably good. Yeah, hopefully we'll have some stuff to be able to evaluate at sort of the sub whole building scale at some point. Right now, what we're getting in terms of this exercise is just a facade assembly. So it's really hard to then say so how does that compare to a building that's at 250 kilograms of carbon per square foot of per square meter of occupiable space? We can't yet, but hopefully that's coming. I know that's one of their aims with the CLF is in their current benchmarking study of the whole building scale is to also be able to break it into subcomponents. So we'll have one for envelope, we'll have one for structure. We'll see.
And I think, oh, go ahead, Sinead.
Oh, I wanted to share screen and add some of my thought. So this is divided into 3 different groups to compare result. You'll see brick wall, metal wall, wood wall have different industry average. So this is how you would typically get for different types. And in these 3 different wall, you see different categories that contribute differently to the embodied carbon. And having that comparison will help you make material decision within this wall assembly. In this metal wall, you see ACM panel having a lot of contribution to the embodied carbon, but not the rest of it. So if you start changing some of the material in these category, it will help lower the embodied carbon. And also, in addition to this, I was trying to do a little bit of embodied comparison to operational carbon, which E3's probably we're gonna talk on that next time when we have the second workshop. So if you have a 4-story building with 4 of these walls on each side, you have some conversion into like per square feet, and the embodied carbon of these 3 walls have a magnitude different of like 13 tenths and 4. And if you compare that with like operational carbon in Philadelphia area, with each degree of each kilowatt you use and enter your EUI over here, you see difference in the per square feet embodied carbon in terms of operation. And you see they are not very different, and just for the facade. And you haven't counted the interior, the structure, and the finishes, and other things that go into the embodied carbon of the building. Just some of my thought. And when I went through this exercise, we start to think, oh, can I reduce the brick thickness? Do I really need 4 inches of brick as a veneer? Can I pursue alternative of assembly so that the embodied carbon is lower? Do I really need CMU? Because it accounts for so much of embodied carbon. Yeah, just a little bit of thought.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that was a way more I was about to say something similar, but much less sophisticated. But I think to Paul's point, I think even if you're not an advanced user or have done several embodied carbon analyses, I think you can, start to, number one, start to look at, is a metal framed wall system better than a concrete backup versus a wood backup? And you can kind of make those order of magnitude decisions that Sinead was just talking about. And then kind of as you move forward, within that wall assembly, you find those high value targets and kind of focus on those, like the ACM that Sinead was just showing for that metal clad assembly. And I think you can, what we were seeing is that, even within a product category, there's a best and a, and an average and a worst. And I guess one thing, I noticed as we were doing our search too, Sinead, was that, right now you have to be careful about how many variables you select in EC3 because it will limit your responses. And I think for the CMU, the best CMU was made in California, which doesn't surprise me, but we have to ship it all the way across the country. And I'm wondering if that holds up by the time you get to Pennsylvania with that CMU. I mean, our CMU is probably going to come from, Ridley Park or something like that. But I guess the EPDs maybe don't yet factor in local geography. They're probably still maybe at a national level for the most part. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so the EPDs are made by the manufacturers, right? Which means that they're essentially publishing them at the point that they are no longer responsible. With, if you think about it, like there's no way for them to account for transportation from wherever their warehouse is to wherever your project is, because they're selling them all over the place.
Mhm.
So that's where some of the other tools come in when we start to talk about other aspects of life, of the life of a building and the life of construction and all of that. And if you want to start being able to, accurately measure those trade-offs, one thing you can do is look at some of the carbon calculators that exist for transportation. In the US, almost everything gets trucked. So how much does it weigh times how far did it go times what the carbon emissions are of a truck is how you would calculate it. Alternately, you can start to use tools like Athena, which is also free. It's not as user friendly, but it's free. Or some of the other tools like Tally would be another one that allow you to make those more specific for your project. For most materials, we typically see 5% or less of their total carbon emissions coming from transportation. But that's, again, typical, not we've decided to transport our CMU all the way across the country using a truck. It's a really heavy material, so there's probably going to be a lot of associated carbon emissions with that.
Thank you, Ifree. That was great. So we do have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? I did want to use the time to just garner any feedback. We do have another workshop coming up in August. So if there's any feedback you want to share now, or email Josh or I on your experience here today and what we could do better for the next one, or what we can include, we'd love to take your thoughts into account. And yeah, are there any last closing thoughts?
So I don't know if there was anyone going to speak. I was just going to say I do want to thank Shade
Yes.
and Ifree and Surya and Aishu for really helping put this exercise together and giving this intro. I only downloaded EC3 for the first time last Thursday, so for considering that, I feel like I'm actually starting to understand this whole process a lot better. So that's encouraging, and kind of understanding the limitations of all the tools. And I know Ifree had previously presented, there's something like 80 something tools out there for embodied carbon. That's overwhelming in itself. but I think just kind of understanding how we can make these order of magnitude decisions and then refine them and find the right tool along the way. It's all kind of part of the learning process. So, Jonky, should I just close out with our final?
Yep.
Okay.
I think it's just that we just have one slide for the
Just one more
next
slide.
session, right? Like our AI
Ah.
Code's not meeting the 3rd Thursday this month. We're meeting the 2nd Thursday.
Right.
So the date's August 11th. If anyone wants to join our next meeting, we're meeting on August 11th.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
All
thank
right.
you. Thank you all for joining, and look for our next session in August.
Thank you.